In today's first reading, we have the 10 Commandments, the 10 words that are universally acknowledged as being valuable for any civilization and universally ignored by every civilization. The 10 Commandments, the 10 words, generally are applied to the life of the individual. But when the society as a whole makes a shift away from them, the individual's capacity to live a godly life is greatly diminished. The first 3 commandments have to do with our relationship with the divine, the numinous, the holy, the transcendent. A faith in one God who set all of the natural worlds on their course, who created all things visible and invisible, the universe we can see and the many universes we can't see, the God of life, who is nevertheless involved with each individual life as well as life in general. And he wants to be reverenced above all things for our sake. Because if we place any natural creature in place of God, we're in trouble. And also, he would like his name to be reverenced and not to be used in vain. And it's just not meaning vulgarity, but using God's name in vain is trying to manipulate God to do our will rather than opening our will to God. When I worked one summer in the mills here in Youngstown, I was always amazed at just the entire sea of profanity as a student of language. There was one fellow that was hired the same day I was hired, and every third word, counting the words a and the articles, was a curse word or a vulgarity. And I said, boy, how does he communicate anything? A simple thing like, bring the wheelbarrow, would have about 20 words to it. Most of them you can't say in church. And I would hear over and over, at the least frustration, God damn this, God damn that. And there's many reasons industry collapsed in this area. Most of them social, economic, global forces, labor versus management. But I have a theological explanation. After 100 years of hearing billions of pleas to God to condemn this mill, to condemn that mill, God finally said, okay, I got the message. Could you imagine how different life would be if they said, God bless this, God bless that? How much more productive they would have been. Would there have been any way those mills could have been outproduced anywhere in the world if we had godly men using godly language, looking forward to going to work every day because it was a blessed opportunity, not a damnable burden? How different that would be in the world. Don't use the Lord's name in vain. And then keep holy the Lord's Day. Now, in the ancient world, when Judea was conquered and people were carried off into exile, the Babylonians had a 10-day calendar. And on their calendar, people would get off 1 day out of every 10. The Jews said, no, we need 1 day off out of every 7 to reverence God, to spend time with our Lord. Well, after a while, even the pagans said, hey, this is not a bad idea. 1 day off out of 10, 1 day off out of 7. I think I'm going to go with the 1 day off out of 7. Now, there was a time when there was the Industrial Revolution when there were horrors beyond belief in so-called Christian countries. Up until 1919, in the steel mills of the United States, the work schedule was you would work a 12-hour shift for 12 straight days, and then on the 13th day, you would work a 24-hour shift. It was called the long term. And the 14th day you got off. Well, there was a huge, violent 1919 strike that at least they ended the 24-hour shift. But the industrialists thought it was more important for the laborers to produce than to have even one day off in 7 to honor God, to be with their families. What a hellish situation when we stop honoring God, when we stop thinking of one day a week at least. As Christians, we reverence the day Christ rose from the dead. So many people, now they'll gladly not work on Sunday, but they'll work at having fun. I've got to play so many rounds of golf, I've got to go fishing, maybe my wife has nagged me into doing chores around the house. But so many sleep in, don't bother to go to church on Sunday, to spend even 1 hour with the Lord of the universe, of all things visible and invisible, and say, thank you, God. And do we have a more fulfilled society, a happier society? No, we have a society adrift and asleep to what's really real. And then we start with the other commandments, starting with honoring of parents. And this had to do not with children honoring their parents, but adult children honoring their parents. And we've got a culture that's embraced a view of the family without honor, without loyalty. I've seen so many people at the first sign of trouble in their marriage go their own way. Now, sometimes marriages have to be split up. We know that. But about 80% of marriages could be saved with professional counseling and hard work, if people are willing to make that commitment. People abandon their children, especially men, unfortunately, in this world, quite readily just disappear, impoverishing women and children financially, emotionally, and spiritually in the process. Families without honor. What a terrible time in which to live. And then there's the notion of not stealing. Well, even hardened thieves, professional criminals that rob every chance they get, when they become robbed, they become morally outraged. They know what's right and wrong, they just don't care until it happens to them. Till it happens to them. And there's so many ways to steal and rob today that are ancient as well as modern. You'll find in the prophets of Israel condemnations not only of the sins caused by the 10 Commandments, but exploitation of the poor, the manipulation of currencies. They'll tell you right there, all right, you've manipulated the shekel against this other currency. You've done all types of financial dealings that are condemnable. You'll find the prophets of Israel condemning that. And of course, today in our own culture, international bankers, complex relationships, the global industry, there's so much robbing and stealing on a tremendous level. And it affects the poorest of the poor, as well as the well-to-do. How many people, after companies have done that, have found that they have no retirement funds? How many charitable institutions have invested in one thing or another that seemed like sound investments and turned it out to be Ponzi schemes? And their resources for doing good disappeared. It's almost like thou shalt steal if you steal big enough in our culture. What a terrible time. Thou shalt not steal. It remains there throughout the history of the world. Now, you've heard me over and over say the prophets of Israel said, take care of the weak, the widow, the orphan, the poor, the stranger in our midst. And you could see Jesus reiterating that. And in the gospel of the rich man and the poor man, the rich man says, at least send somebody to my brothers so they won't end up in this mess. He said, but they have the law and the prophets. We have the law and the prophets. Are we listening to them? And Jesus said, well, Abraham says to the rich man suffering in the fires of hell, they have the prophets, that's enough for them. He said, no, but if somebody comes back from the dead, then they'll listen. And Abraham says, even if somebody comes back from the dead, they won't listen. We have the resurrected Christ giving us that parable, giving us that story. Have we listened as individuals, as a culture? Or do we still embrace the notion that the strong should exploit the weak, the clever should steal from the foolish, etc.? And then we have the whole area of thou shalt not kill. Well, the word is actually thou shalt not murder. Take the life of the innocent. Take the life of someone who's not threatening our life. Because in the scriptures there are wars all over the place from beginning to end as Israel tries to defend itself. But nevertheless, the slaying of people for no very profound reason is condemned quite clearly. Now, we live in a world which is very terrifying. Since I was born in 1946, there's been one undeclared war after another undeclared war, after another undeclared war, after another undeclared war, and we're in the midst of an undeclared war now, and we'll have another undeclared war tomorrow. It's war without end. Thou shalt not kill. Now, we do have within Catholicism a very carefully worked out over the centuries just war theory. But it can be manipulated to make any war justifiable. Thou shalt not kill. Now, even in the so-called good war, if there ever was one like World War II, where the United States did deliver the world from Nazism and Japanese imperialism, there were so many horrible things done. The massive bombing of cities in Europe and in Asia, the nuclear bombing of 2 cities, one of which happened to be the Catholic center of Japan, Nagasaki. What horrors were unleashed? And over the decades of my priesthood, I've heard many confessions from many people, going from white lies to crimes against humanity. And from World War II until today, I've heard confessions of veterans who crossed the line. They knew it because of the insanity of war, of either deliberately killing civilians or prisoners or whatever. They come back to God begging for forgiveness. But they were put in a situation in which death and killing was the norm. Thou shalt not kill. And of course, we live in a nation in which we've turned our back on the most defenseless of all, those children in the womb who have no protection from society, who are so vulnerable, so dependent on their mothers. What a terrible time we live. Last year, it was finally recorded that there were more abortions in New York City than live births. And the next thing on the horizon is this horrible thing called post-birth abortions. Just in the latest issue of the British Medical Journal, they had 2 scientists saying, well, if a baby's born with a defect that wasn't detected in the womb, well, since there's no difference of the baby being born, 5 minutes earlier, they could be aborted in the womb. When they're born with this defect, couldn't their life be ended then? Infanticide. It's here already in very late-term abortions. And so they're saying, well, maybe it's not so bad. Here's a newborn baby, totally dependent on us. We don't have to give it any medical care. We could either let it die naturally or intervene and kill it then. What a terrible time when thou shalt not kill has been suspended. And then thou shalt not commit adultery. Over the last 40 or 50 years, I defy you to think of one popular television show that hammered home the fact that people should wait till marriage to be sexually intimate. And once married, should remain faithful for life, no matter what the temptations were. By and large, that notion is almost a joke today. And from public school education to popular media to the example of political leaders, we almost have the notion that thou shalt commit adultery. What a sad time when the laws of God and nature have been suspended. And the whole notion of coveting, or our whole advertising is built on that. You shall want your neighbor's car or better. You shall want his property or better. So we say in this Lenten season all of this, Lord, have mercy on us. And the good news is the Lord does just that.